Cars from General Motors to exercising every day to stay in shape, to adjusting our diets perhaps. But in such a world, we would not be living under a constitution of enumerated powers. We'd be living instead under a regime of absolute federal control and unlimited mandates. This repeal bill will ensure that the unconstitutional individual mandate never commandeers Americans into purchasing health insurance. Repeal will also ensure that we can go back to the table to enact meaningful medical malpractice reform and end the costly practice of defensive medicine. Defensive medicine costs taxpayers real money, as doctors are forced by the threat of lawsuits to conduct tests and prescribe drugs that aren't medically required. They're just to avoid lawsuits. A survey published in the Archives of Internal Medicine found that the vast majority of doctors practice defensive medicine. According to the survey, 91% of doctors reported believing that physicians order more tests and procedures than needed to protect themselves from malpractice suits. Even President Obama has acknowledged that excessive defensive medicine reinforces our current system. And I'll quote, that's a quote, excessive defensive medicine reinforces our current system. And I would point out there are estimates that range between 3.5% of our overall health care costs in America, as high as 8.5% of our health care costs in America are attributed to defensive medicine and the litigation that's associated with medical malpractice. It could run as high as $208 billion a year. We have lower estimates, and I'll address those numbers in a moment. But why then do the Democrats' health care bill do nothing to prevent defensive medicine? Why did Democrats choose to enact a health care law that creates more federal rules for doctors without protecting them from lawsuits if they deviate one bit from those rules? That can only produce more litigation and less effective health care. But there are effective means for ending the practice of defensive medicine and reducing the increased expenses that lawsuits add to this country's health care costs. According to the Congressional Budget Office, Republican proposed litigation reforms would save at least $54 billion in health care costs. I think it could be substantially more. But Democrats ignored Republican proposals in enacting their health care law and even encouraged states not to enforce similar malpractice reforms of their own. There are some models out there in the states. Texas and California would be two that come to mind. This is a major reason why we need to repeal the Democrats' health care law. We need to go back to the drawing board and, among other things, enact meaningful malpractice litigation reform to help improve health care, make it more affordable, and save taxpayer money while reducing the federal deficit. Once repeal of this blatantly unconstitutional health care law is accomplished, we can move forward with positive health care reforms, including health care litigation reform. I suggest that we pull Obamacare out by the roots, root and branch, lock, stock, and barrel, eradicate it completely, and leave not one vestige of its DNA left behind, because it is a malignant tumor into the spirit of America's vitality and constitutionality. And if it's allowed to have any particle left, it will regrow again, and it will metastasize like a tumor and grow back, and it will consume the liberty and the vigor of the American people. We must pull it out by the roots. This Congress has been elected to do so. Mr. Chairman, I intend to participate in this, a full-throated 100% effort in doing so. I appreciate your attention, the opportunity to testify, and I'd be happy to yield to any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. So where do you guys stand on this issue? I think is the natural question we need to pose here. Let me say at the outset that obviously we want to ensure that every single American has access to quality health insurance and health care. The President of the United States indicated in his first press conference following the election that he believed that this bill is flawed. He said that the 1099 provision that was in there that imposes a burden on small businesses in this country needed to be addressed. Most recently, Judge Henry Hudson in Virginia has determined that the mandate, about which I guess all three of you were speaking, is unconstitutional. And so we have the executive, the President of the United States, referring to this as a flawed bill. We have obviously a court decision that has been made. And it seems to me that the right thing for us to do is this two-step approach that we are taking. Number one, it is our effort to repeal the measure. And number two, as I said, the measure that I'm introducing, have introduced, and have many co-sponsors on, which calls for us to get your committees working to ensure that every single American has access to quality health insurance and health care. Now, I believe that there are 5 simple steps that need to be taken that would immediately drive the cost of health insurance down. And I think that we should expand medical savings accounts. We should have associated health plans. We should have meaningful lawsuit abuse reform. We should have pooling to deal with pre-existing conditions. And we should do everything that we possibly can to ensure that people can acquire insurance across state lines. Those 5 simple things, most of which are actually supported by President Obama. In every one of those instances, from his State of the Union message where he talked about lawsuit abuse reform to his interest in looking at the purchase of insurance across state lines being made available, there has been interest. And if the President hasn't talked about every one of those issues, I know that there are Democrats who have. And so I believe that we have an opportunity to come together in a bipartisan way. And we know that there was not bipartisan support for this measure when we saw it in the 111th Congress, but I believe that in the 112th Congress, upon repealing this measure, we can come together, Democrats and Republicans alike, working with the President to ensure that every American has access to quality health insurance by driving those costs down. And so I thank you all for your thoughtful remarks, and I will say that you've come forward with some interesting figures that are obviously going to be challenged by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Just this notion that 87 million Americans, as you said, Chairman Upton, will lose their health insurance when, in fact, we're hearing that everyone could keep their insurance. The fact that we have this CBO study that has now come out showing that we will see an increase in the deficit of $145 billion, when in fact, if you look at the gimmickry involved, we're talking about $700 billion in gimmicks, and to me it is incomprehensible to think that putting into place taxes, mandates, and an extraordinarily burdensome structure like this is going to save taxpayer dollars. We know that the taxes alone in this measure are going to exacerbate the economic downturn through which we are struggling today. And so again, I thank you all very much for your remarks and appreciate the thoughtful approach. And I assume that I have a commitment from all 3 of you that when we pass my measure that directs your committees to begin work on an effort to put these measures in place that will decrease the cost of health insurance for Americans, that you're committed to doing that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt, we will be embarking on this almost right away, and we will have a product that you will be very proud of, and I would like to think will be bipartisan in terms of what we would like to do to help working families and businesses provide benefits for their workers.
Both of the other 2 gentlemen nodded, so I assume, and I know you can't speak for the entire committee, but I feel very sanguine that that your colleagues on the Judiciary Committee and Chairman Smith will lead an effort there, and I got the great nod from Chairman Klein. So we look forward to working together in a bipartisan way to ensure that we can drive the cost of health insurance down. Mr. Sessions.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and welcome to each of you who are here today. Today, with great anticipation, we here in the Rules Committee are looking forward to hearing not only what you have to say, but also our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. During the last few years, this has been an active discussion, and I note there are a number of people in the room today who are back to give us discussion, including the gentleman, Mr. Andrews, who have given us thoughtful ideas. I'm very pleased to hear that what you're going to do is go and examine, reopen, and make sure that the facts of the case now are better known. I will tell you that the American people recognize, as gasoline nears $4 and we've been told $5 a gallon, that we recognize, or at least a group of people that I hang around with recognize that gasoline at $4 or $5 a gallon, combined with the economy that we have that is a drag on jobs, and knowing that this health care bill, which is a devastator not only for the amount of money it costs, but also in the job loss that takes place, is slowing our economy. Chronic unemployment is what we've now had. But when you look up and see that gasoline is going to this price because of the economic advantages that are taking place in China and India, there are economies that are booming, and the United States is left out of that because we are embroiled in trying to do health care, cap and trade, and all these things which diminish our economic base. So it's my hope that we will think about catching up with the world as the world leader in job creation, innovation. The last thing I'd like to say is I hope that there will be some focus on pharmaceutical companies that I believe have been diminished greatly in their capacity to provide R&D, the advantages to solve and cure problems that exist in the marketplace today, that is the promise of better utilization of our dollars, because we can have a pharmaceutical industry which can cure problems that maybe some doctors cannot do. So I'm very excited about what this new day that has dawned and what it means, and we'll look forward to hearing not only from my colleagues, the gentleman, Mr. Andrews, who is back again, but also my colleagues on the Rules Committee that are Democrats, about how we're actually going to go look at this issue, how we're going to dissect it and move forward. So, Mr. Chairman, with great anticipation, I appreciate your leadership.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman Sessions, and let me call on Mrs. Slaughter and say that we have a quorum call that's just been called on the floor, and so I would encourage members to record their presence downstairs, and we're going to continue with the hearing. So thank you, Mrs. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer, and good morning, gentlemen. We're happy to see you. Congratulations on your new posts. I think this is probably one of the first times that I have been able to speak about this. I understand your great determination to root it out, root and branch, burn over the ashes and spit on the ground, as far as I can tell. America should tremble. You do know that the latest polls show that 56% of Americans really like this bill, 13% think it's not strong enough. And you do understand that the harm you're going to do. But let me ask all three of you, what do you think about holding a hearing to do away with this kind of legislation, something of this magnitude, that frankly America has not done in probably a generation, without holding any hearings in your committee? I'd like to hear from all of you about that. That we find ourselves this morning with an emergency rules committee to get this done so that next week you can vote to undo this with no hearings and no discussion.
Let me just say,
Yep.
this is not an emergency meeting. This meeting was announced earlier.
I would just like to say, and I appreciate the comments from my friend.
Yes.
And welcome to your new slot as well. I say that in a friendly way. I would just note that our party leadership, with virtually everyone behind it of our members, announced last summer. First of all, there was not a single Republican, as I recall, that voted for the bill last March when it passed by only 7 votes, despite a 78-vote margin by Speaker Pelosi. We announced in the summer that we would, if we took the majority, we would look for a full repeal. It was part of our pledge that was publicly unveiled in late September, early October. I would dare say that every one of the new freshman class and many of us that ran for re-election had this as part of our platform. It should come as no surprise. But we also said repeal and replace.
It is absolutely no surprise. But let me say, you were on the committees, I assume, that held over 100 hours of hearings on this bill.
We did. And
so how can you say
that
you had no input?
Well,
if you attended 100 hours of hearings
I'd tell you how we had no input.
You didn't. Your amendments were accepted.
And some of them disappeared between our committee and coming to the Rules Committee
last year.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I won't right now, but what has really stunned me most is I'm knowing from the very beginning that 100 hours of hearings were held, 83 hours committee markups, House heard from 181 witnesses, Democrat and Republican. 239 amendments were considered in the 3 committees, and 121 adopted. The Democrat caucus spent at least 4 times doing caucuses to go over this bill section by section, hours at a time. And yet, despite this and the fact that you were in those meetings, with the exception of the Democrat caucus meetings, You continue to say that you had no input on this bill. How can any of the three of you say that?
If you would
with
yield
straight
for,
face?
if you would yield
Yep,
for
I'd like to hear from
a
all
moment.
three of you, certainly.
Chairman Waxman had a 36-23 advantage. In the markup that we had last summer, unlike most markups where the bill is able to be marked up Title A, Title B, Title C, we could only do the third title without doing the first two, without any amendments being shown for a 48-hour advance, and not until we finished Title III could we go back to Title I or II.
But can you really say to the people that you represent with straight face, either three of you, I'd like to hear from all, that you had no input on this bill and you didn't know what was in it?
I find,
Mr.
thank you.
Klein, I'd love to
Yeah.
hear that.
Thank you, Ms. Slaughter. I do find it interesting that in spite of all those hours that you're talking about, hearings, we still had the fascinating occurrence of the speaker saying that we need to pass it and then find out what was in it. I mean, the truth is that Americans didn't know what was in this thing, and many others didn't, because this legislation was not written in a bipartisan way. The input that we had as...
The hearings were bipartisan, Mr. Klein. That's what really
I'm
is.
sorry, it's not written in a
It was written under the same ways that we write bills in the House, and I'm astonished. That I think that, but there are other things I want to go on, so we won't dwell on them, but let you finish.
Could I make just one quick point?
Yes.
I read a lot of the bill, and I meant to bring it.
Well, I hope so. It was up for
and I've
months,
read it
I think
on
8
parts of
months.
it on the House floor.
Uh-huh.
And I would say to the section that Mr. Klein testified on with regard to the section 1099, if you read that particular page 737 in the enacted bill, you would not have any idea that this was going to require a $600 transaction filing by every business.
We can't discuss every jot and tittle
Well,
on
did
this
you know
bill.
that was in the bill before we took it up on the House floor?
Absolutely. I
even-
think that that was a mistake, and I don't know of a bill we've ever done through this House that didn't need that. But for over 100 years, Congress has tried to do something about health care in the United States, starting with Teddy Roosevelt, over 100 years. We didn't take this on because we're masochists. We didn't take it on because we wanted to have town hall meetings where people were throwing rocks and things at us. We did it because 17% of GDP was taken up with health care, rising every day, and something had to be done. And we were the only industrial country on the face of the earth that did not provide health care for its people. And this, believe me, I went through this in the Clinton administration, and we went through it now. The 8 years that you all were in charge, you did absolutely nothing about the cost of health care or any kind of health care bill. Now, and I'll talk about jamming down the throat. I don't know what you'd call this. And by the way, this is an emergency session. It was called last night. It comes under the heading of being an emergency meeting. But we're rushing this through, no doubt about it, despite all the plans that we were all going to wait forever and read it all and have all this time. But you don't have a CBO estimate, do you, of what it would cost if you do what you want to do?
I'm sorry, my staff is speaking to me.
Is there a CBO estimate on repeal of this bill?
Yes, Madam Chair.
And what is it,
Chair,
please?
I've forgotten that. Yes, Mrs. Slaughter, there is, and in fact, it's in your folder. It is out.
230 billion
And actually,
for the
the
first 10 years, is
conclusion
that right?
on page 4 of the letter is $145 billion.
That's the first 10 years. 1.2 trillion for the second year. So you talk about this being a job killer. I don't know how you can arrive at that. 935,000 jobs have been added in the health sectors, 171,000 just since it's been in effect. But one of the things, Judge Henry Hudson having been used here, I really was so happy to hear that because I've done a little work on this one. You know that 10 federal judges threw the case out. 2 federal judges said absolutely it's constitutional. You wouldn't read that anywhere, but that's the fact. We get to Judge Hudson. Judge Hudson is a confirmed Republican, says he is. He tried several careers before. He said, I was just in the right place at the right time, and they made me a judge. He is a co-owner of a consulting firm, a Republican consulting firm, and one of his clients is the Attorney General of the state of Virginia who brought the lawsuit. If there was ever a case in this world that cried out for recusal, that was it. And I really because I have respect for all three of you, it really embarrasses me for you that you would use him as your case, knowing that about the other 10 and the two that
gentlelady would
said
yield.
it was constitutional. We are rushing through here, getting ready to do something pretty devastating, I think.
Would the
With a
gentlelady
terrible
yield?
effect. Yes, I will, Mr. King. We
I
haven't
know you
heard
want to hear
from you.
from all
I'd
three
like
of us,
to. I certainly do.
I appreciate that. I'd just point out that my recollection is that consulting fee between the Attorney General of the state of Virginia and the consulting firm that you referenced that is, I think it is part owned, part invested by Judge Hudson, was less than $10,000, and that they severed that relationship immediately
Well,
when they found out that
Well,
that
I
had
must
taken
tell
place.
you, Mr. King,
So it
that as
was
far
of
as I'm concerned, a
insignificance.
federal judge should not be a part owner in any way, shape, or form of a Republican consulting firm. But I think, again, our standards have fallen so far. I mean, we even have Supreme Court justices.
To complete your question to the three of us that I would
Yes.
like to respond to, and that is that there is no significant tort reform in this Obamacare health care bill. And it wasn't jurisdiction then of the Judiciary Committee, so we didn't address those massive hundreds of billions of dollars of costs that are unnecessary in our health care. We can do that in the future. That's one of the reasons why the Judiciary Committee didn't have a legitimate means to have a voice on this bill. And I'm surprised that you would raise the issue about an emergency rules meeting here on this, given how many times that I have seen the language change from a committee before it went on its way to the floor, even some of my own language on different bills. And
We
so
never
I think we're
changed the
getting to a
language on
legitimate
bills, Mr.
process
King.
here.
No, we
I'm
did
grateful
not.
that we're having a hearing.
We
And I
did not
believe
do
that
that.
we have a unanimous position on our part of Republicans and a bipartisan position. When the bill comes to the floor, I believe there will be significant Democrat votes for this. Everybody understands this bill. We've debated this for a year. I yield back.
Let me just, 15 seconds. Our committee, we had 8 Republican-passed amendments, and somehow they disappeared between coming across the street from Independence Avenue to here to being part of the debate.
That had
and,
nothing to do with the Rules Committee.
Well, it wasn't here. I don't know what happened, but they weren't there. The other thing is, we tried actually in our committee to have a tort reform amendment, something that the president told a number of us one-on-one, that he wanted tort reform as part of this package. We tried to offer, our side tried to offer that amendment in full committee, and we were denied because of the jurisdiction issue. But again, it never came back from the judiciary, so it couldn't even be considered then on the House floor.
Well,
So it
tort
wasn't
reform
an
is
open
generally a
process.
state issue. That's really done by the state.
Well,
But there is $50 million, I believe, in this bill to help.
the president
do
asked
that.
for it, and
We tried to do that as well, with repeal of the McCarran-Ferguson Act, which I'm happy to say almost everybody voted for in the House, which was something really needed to be done. It's been around for years, and it's really very inhibiting. It's a great gift to the insurance industry, and we'd like to get that done. We wanted to do that, the medical malpractice along with it, but we were unable to get that done. And I would say to you that that really does need attention. The McCarran-Ferguson Act really ought to go. I just find myself flummoxed after 20-something years here that, of course, we had this happen with a catastrophic illness bill years ago. Heaven knows how much further ahead we would have been maybe if we'd been able to keep that. But I understand.
well, again, and I was
your
here when
zeal
that
about
happened.
it,
I don't
yeah.
know that Mr. Klein or Mr.
Yeah.
King were here then, but that bill passed.
I wasn't here.
Yes, you were.
I was here
When we
after
repealed
it
it.
had been repealed.
But, no, I think you were, you and
you?
I think were elected in 1986 together.
Right.
That bill passed, people found what was in it, and a year or two later, it was repealed almost overwhelmingly.
It was.
And my bet is that you, Mr. Dreyer, and Mr. Upton voted for the bill and then voted to repeal it. At least that's what I did.
Yep.
I think you were here.
We weren't here when the bill came up. I can remember looking at that.
But anyway, we'll
I know I
look
was.
it up.
Repeal. All right.
I don't know where you
But
guys.
But again, we found out what was in it, like the American
would
people
just
have,
like to
and
think-
wanted it repealed.
The thing that has been so distressing to me is we had no fingerprints, we knew nothing about this bill, which we all know is not true, that we jammed it down the public's throat, which we know is not true. And if that was a jamming, I don't know what you're going to call this. You're going to have to come up with, maybe we'll come up with an adjective on our side that will be appropriate to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Slaughter. Let me just respond to a couple of comments briefly, and then we'll call on Ms. Fox. And first, this is technically designated as an emergency meeting for the following reason. We took the oath of office less than 24 hours ago. And the minority was informed of this meeting at the beginning of this week. And today is Thursday. And so, from my perspective, the notice clearly was provided. And so that's why I said this is not considered an emergency meeting. And so everyone knew that this was happening, and it has been made very clear. I want to make sure that every member has gone down to record their presence on the quorum call. I have not. I'm going to call on Ms. Fox now and turn over to Vice Chairman Sessions, the gavel. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.